What can you say about the Crow franchise other than that, hey, some of these movies are great and others are, well, movies, I suppose? This is a series of films that started in the 90s and probably should have ended in the 90s and went all the way up until 2005. There is a Crow reboot, or remake rather, I suppose, in the works that is supposed to be slated for release later this year. It stars Bill Skarsgård as the Crow, to be more specific, Eric Draven from the original film, and hopefully it'll be pretty good. But until then, we have 4 films to rank. So without further ado, let's get started with the worst of the series, The Crow, Wicked Prayer. The fourth and final Crow film up to this point, Wicked Prayer stars Edward Furlong as the titular Crow. The film starts off kind of rather interesting. You basically have these Native Americans who have been wronged by this mining company, which has made people sick, and the villains of the film feel that they have been wronged as well and take revenge on the town and murder innocent people, including our titular hero, who comes back as the Crow. I actually have something against Edward Furlong, and I think he's kind of an underrated actor in some regards. He's not great, but he does deliver an okay performance here. He has kind of a who gives a shit kind of attitude as the Crow, which is a new way to play it, honestly. Apart from that, and a pretty hilarious performance by Dennis Hopper as a Satan-worshipping pimp, there's just not much in this film that I like. Released in 1996, and not to be confused with the other City of Angels movies starring Nicolas Cage, this film actually was originally over 2 hours long in its original form. And Miramax and the Weinsteins, including the infamous Harvey Weinstein, had this movie pretty much butchered down to less than 90 minutes. What we had was a more dark, macabre movie that was more violent, more disturbing, and more meaningful, that was more or less butchered to make a 85-minute action fest. It's not particularly good, but it's not awful either. There are some really good things in this movie, such as the performances. Perez does a great job as this new Crow. And there's this new villain called Judah, and he's really badass. Actually, I think he's one of the better villains of the franchise, who basically is a Satan worshiper who's trying to use the power of the Crow to harness the powers of hell, because he went there when he was younger and wants to rule hell, essentially. It's a pretty interesting story, and one that works fairly well. There's a bunch of interesting villains in the film, played by Iggy Pop. Thomas Jane even makes an appearance. And Thuy Trang, yes, the Yellow Ranger from Power Rangers, is even one of the villains in the movie. It's an interesting film, but unfortunately in its current form, it is just kind of a mess and doesn't flow well at all. I completely blame the producers. I do not blame the director. And I really wish we one day get to see his vision come to life and restored in a proper cut. There is a director's cut, but that's kind of a lie. It's only 10 minutes longer, and I do recommend that over this theatrical cut here. But on Blu-ray, I think you can only get the theatrical cut, so it's kind of unfortunate. You're kind of limited either way. There's a really good video by Good Bad Flicks where he talks about this movie and how it was butchered, and I highly recommend that video. Just know if this film was released in its theatrical form, there's a very good chance it could be much higher on this list. But as it stands, it's pretty forgettable. Up next, and kind of surprisingly, we have The Crow Salvation. The third in the series, and released in the year 2000, shows this new character named Alex Corvus, who is wrongly accused of killing his girlfriend, and he gets put into the electric chair. He comes back and more or less kills the corrupt cops who put him in that situation, and along the way he gets help from his girlfriend's sister, played by Kirsten Dunst, to help him seek his revenge and find justice for her. It's an actually pretty interesting premise. This one actually kind of surprised me. I had seen it when I was younger, probably about, 10, 15 years ago. But I rewatched it for this video because I hadn't really remembered much of it, just a few parts here and there. And it kind of blew me away. It's one of the better Crow movies. I actually rather enjoyed this one. Kirsten Dunst gives a pretty good performance, and Eric Mabius is a really damn good Crow in this one. The villain is played by Fred Ward, and I've always been a fan of Fred Ward. And it's cool to see him in a film like this, and he plays a pretty damn good villain. Overall, the story's really solid, the effects are pretty good, and the visual style is actually interesting in this one. There's also a really good soundtrack featuring songs from Kid Rock, Rob Zombie, and even Danzig. It has a pretty damn good late 90s, early 2000s soundtrack, and it works pretty well here. The only problem I really had with the movie, really only one, was that during one scene there's a car chase and he's being chased by the police. Now, not all the police are bad in this movie, and they do point that out. There's only two bad cops in this chase, and upon the chase coming towards its end, like three or four cops are killed by the Crow, and it's just kind of brushed over. They don't really acknowledge the fact that he killed some innocent police officers. It's just played up like a cool scene, and I'm like, you blew up a helicopter that had innocent cops in it, more than likely, plus two other cop cars. Later in the film, I guess they try to retcon this, or at least fix that, because he ends a couple of more cops, and they actually acknowledge that he was forced to do it, like his hand was forced because they came after him because the bad guy sent them. But I'm like, what about the five or so you ended earlier in the movie? It's just kind of brushed off, and it's like, hey, you did some bad stuff. The Crow's supposed to be a good guy. But other than that, the film doesn't really have any major flaws. It's a pretty solid story, told pretty well with a damn good cast and a good soundtrack. It's very underrated, and I actually recommend The Crow Salvation. It's a pretty damn good movie. But lastly, we have 1994's The Crow, starring the late, great Brandon Lee. I really love this movie. Based on the James O'Barr comic of the same name, it basically shows Eric Draven as he is resurrected by the Crow after him and his girlfriend are brutally attacked and killed by this ruthless gang. This film is very entertaining. It essentially has a very similar plot to its sequels, but it's made so much better here. The production design is amazing. The special effects hold up very well. Brandon Lee, who was sadly killed during the making of this movie by an accidental gunshot from a blank of all things that had a cartridge lodged into the barrel. However, they did use some old footage and some digital trickery to finish the movie, and it's pretty much seamless, even all these years later. This film is 30 years old this year, and it's kind of poetic that they're actually remaking the film 30 years later, telling the Eric Draven story again. I very much do love this movie. It has a great soundtrack, amazing visuals, really good action, a great performance by Brandon Lee. It's his absolute best performance, and sadly, it's his final performance. Much like his father before him, he was cut down in the prime of his life, but he'll always be remembered for this great film. Sadly, I got another great Crow movie after this. This is pretty much the one I'd recommend to anybody. I do like some of the sequels, but they really do pale in comparison to this movie. I very much enjoy this movie. It's highly recommended. It's very stylish. Ernie Hudson's in the film as well. He gives a great performance. All the villains do a damn good job here. And there's really nothing not to like about this movie. If you love a good, macabre, dark, superhero-style action movie, you got to give The Crow a chance. Well, that's my list. I very much enjoy the series, like I said, but the only two I really consider like good movies would be The Crow and probably Salvation. City of Angels could have been a great movie, but it was butchered by producers. And Wicked Prayer did try in the first half, but kind of turned into pure silliness in the second half. All in all, not a great series, but there's some damn good entries in here, including the first one, which I very much recommend. It's sad that the only real sequel is City of Angels, which the only reason is a sequel, it has one returning character, and that's Sarah from the first one. Other than that, I still do recommend most of these movies. I thank you all for watching, and peace out.